Some framing thoughts as we begin our Power Hour of Torah. First of all, so grateful to Jen Veg and the entire Maharat family for bringing us together today, and looking forward to many other opportunities to continue to learn with you online. And Jen will share some of those opportunities coming up in the future. So this is a time for confessions. And so I have one. I have become a fanny pack wearer. Yes, you heard me right. I now wear a fanny pack because I keep losing things. I keep misplacing my phone and my AirPods. There's so much stuff to hold and carry around. I needed one place just to locate everything, since most of my clothing don't have pockets and I didn't want to wear a purse. And so I decided to wear a fanny pack. And I was thinking about the symbolism of that in today's world, because we're all carrying around so much stuff. The world is burning. People are suffering. We're worried about our friends and our neighbors and those who we don't even know. Many of us feel isolated. And this is a time of year where we try to figure out how to hold it all in one place. How do we hold the joys, the daily moments of gratitude, as well as the lows, the things that are hard? The vessel, the container in which we try to organize and make sense of our thoughts and our world, is perhaps, I want to suggest, our curiosity. By showing up today, right here, to learn. Because let's be honest, each year we encounter the same rituals, the same liturgy, the same themes of these Yamim Naraim, of these high holy days. Is there really anything new to learn? So says in his opening sefer in Mesilat Yesharim, the Ramchal, known as Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzuto, he asks this very question. And in his opening comments, he writes, I've composed this work not to teach people what they do not know, but to remind them of what they already know, and which is very familiar to them. Ki lo timsa b'rav divrei, because for you will find in most of my words only things which most people know, things that people already know and do not have a doubt about. So my hope is to take the things we already know and to see them through a different lens. And we have such a wonderful lineup of Maharat scholars to help us do that. Rabbanit Leah Sarna will start us off, the Associate Director of Education and Director of High School Program at Drisha Institute. And then we'll hear from Rabbanit Alissa Thomas Newborn, who is the spiritual leader at B'nai David Judea Congregation. We'll hear from Darshanit, Dr. Miram Udel, the Associate Professor of Yiddish Language at Emory University. We'll hear from Rabba Shani Gross, Director of the North American Programs of Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies. And then we'll close with some final thoughts. And so my goal and my hope is that today, through these words of wisdom, you allow your curiosity, your questions to be stoked. Help you see the things you already know through a new lens, with a new interpretation. And perhaps, like me, you can begin to feel and see that the disparate pieces of the world and our lives can find a container. We can begin to make sense of it all through these words of Torah. Welcome, everybody. And I'm now going to turn it over to Rabbanit Leah Sarna.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Rabba Sara, and also thank you to Jofa and to Sviva for hosting this amazing gathering. It's really awesome to learn with 61 people and counting all at the same time. So without further ado, I've been thinking a lot this year about davening alone. For those of you who know me, you know that I very rarely daven alone. I've been a minyan goer since I was bat mitzvah, basically, and really, like, almost every day of the week, like multiple times a day, as much as I could, like in shul davening with other people. And the past 6 months, that's been something that has been very, very hard for me. And it feels like the messaging is always like, you know what, just like get it together and daven the same as well on your own as you would in shul. And for me, the last 6 months, that's been really almost impossible. I'm really not good at davening by myself, which is why I prioritize minyan and have for a very long time. going into Rosh Hashanah, and even for the people who are going to Shul, and especially with Israel going to be on lockdown or whatever, there's a lot of people who are going to either be davening on their own or davening in Shul in these like very unusual settings. But I'm actually interested the most in people who are going to be davening on their own. So we can't really talk about like women and Rosh Hashanah without talking about the Maharil, without looking to the Maharil. So the Maharil is Yaakov ben Moshe Levi Mullen, who writes from the Rhineland in the years and in the late 1300s and early into the early 1400s. He dies in 1427. So let's see if I can share my screen and we can look at this text together. This is always so messy. Sorry, hopefully this will work. Okay. So here we have the Maharil. He says, "Achen nashim pturut the mitzvah l'seisha zman. The mitzvah l'seisha zman graman. Who so women are pturot, are exempt from blowing the shofar because it is a positive time-bound commandment. Ach machnisin et atzman lechiyuv. They bring themselves into obligation, which is just amazing language. They bring themselves into obligation. And since they have made themselves obligated, women need to do whatever it takes. Get your clothes ready, get your food ready, get everything that would you normally be doing at home. Make sure it's all set so that you can go to Shul and that you can hear Shofar because you've made yourself mechuyavet. And don't make the community wait for you to show up for sure. Which is like a little bit, I don't know how I feel about that last line. But in anyways, right, we can't talk about women in Shofar without this. And the sense is that you get from this is that women in the Rhineland were typically most days of the week, most days of the year on Shabbat, were typically at home. Ideally, hopefully davening at home, though I don't know enough about that exactly. And that one day, Rosh Hashanah, they would show up to Shul to hear Shofar. So what is it exactly about Shofar that if you're a person who always davens alone, for Shofar, you're going to show up to Shul? So I want to actually ask, before we answer that question, I want to actually ask another one. How do I get to my next slide? This way. Okay, so here's a Mishnah from, this is setting up the next question. So here's a Mishnah from Masachet Rosh Hashanah, and it's describing a debate about the order in which you say the brachot in what we now call Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. There's actually, through the Middle Ages, there was actually debate about when you would say Malchiot, Zichronot, and Shofar. Was that just Musaf? Was it actually other tefillot as well? Like really such a fun sugya. We're not gonna look at that now. But anyway, so here you have a debate between Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and Rabbi Akiva about what order, let's call it in Rosh Hashanah Musaf, you say these brachot and how you fit them together. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri's suggestion is that you would roll Malchut into Kedushat Hashem. So when you say Atakadosh, Yochakadosh, Shim Chayom, Yalchasala, you would add Malchut into that, and you would have one bracha at the end. Brachat Hashem, Melech HaKadosh. I don't know, Melech al Kol Haaretz, Melech HaKadosh, something like that. That would be the end of that bracha. And Rabbi Akiva suggests, which is what we do, that you roll in the blessing over the day with Malchiot. So now our Malchiot blessing ends with Melech al Kol Haaretz Mekadish Yisrael V'Yom Hazikaron, right? Familiar? But what's Rabbi Akiva's argument? This is the point. What's Rabbi Akiva's argument? His argument is Im Eino Tokea Lamalchiot Lama Hu Mazkir, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, you blow shofar after both Kedushat Hashem and Malchiot together. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, Malchiot needs to, you would say Kedushat Hashem and Malchiot together, and you wouldn't blow shofar, Ve'eno Tokea, and then you would say the Kedushat Hayom, you would bless the day, and then you would blow shofar. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, shofar is the whole point. You have to blow shofar after Malchiot, otherwise, why are you even saying Malchiot? Okay, so that's Rabbi Akiva's argument. Rabbi Akiva ends up winning. But then, based on that, we have actually a really strange thing. So here we have more evidence about how essential shofar is. We have another Mishnah that says, if you find a shofar after you finish davening, okay, so then you blow shofar after davening. But the Gemara comes in to say, Talmud lo havele shofar meikara. But Hahavili Shofar Meikara Ki Shamahu Aseder Brachot Shamahu. So if you have a shofar from the get-go, you have to blow shofar along with your brachot. You have to. And then we have a story. The story is about Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, who decided, he opted into what many of us are going to be doing this year. He is davening, Rosh Hashanah davening on his own. Rav Papa Bar Shmuel kam letzluya. He gets up to daven. If everyone could please mute, that would be awesome. He gets up to daven, and he says to his servant, Amar le l'shame ki nahir nalach tekali. He says, when I motion to you, please blow shofar for me. Amar le Rava, lo Amar ela b'chaver ir. Rabba says, no, hold on. You should only do that when you are davening with chaver ir or chaver ir. Actually, just we'll do like a quick aside on this language. The Gemara has a lot of different ways that it talks about tzibur or community or minyan. And chaver ir is one that actually gets used specifically for musaf. And the Gemara in Brachot talks about musaf and suggests, actually, there's a suggestion on the table that you wouldn't say musaf at all, like normal Shabbat, any day you say musaf. You would only say musaf if you were davening with chaver ir. And if you were not davening with chaver ir, maybe you would just skip musaf altogether. That doesn't end up winning, as you know. But chaver ir is like very important for Musaf. And in this situation, actually, the Rav writes very interestingly about what Chaver Ir is. He says, if it's Chaver Ir, then it's about the Shaliach Tzibur, and that's actually the thing that it turns on. And if it's Chaver Ir, then that's about being part of the community that's in your city that's davening together. And those two things are different, and the Rav talks about that in relation to the custom suggested by the Aruch, which I don't think we'll actually look at in person here, but suggested by the Aruch to blow shofar on during the silent Amidah. And because you have this suggestion on the table of blowing shofar during the silent Amidah, that's very, very early, and Tosfot quote the Aruch, and the Torah quotes the Aruch, and everyone quotes the Aruch, you would think that you would do what Rav Papa Bar Shmuel suggests, and did, which is, I'm davening on my own, I'm going to do my silent Amidah, and in my silent Amidah, after Balchio, I'm going to blow shofar. And that would be like a really obvious thing to do based on what Rabbi Akiva had just said, which is, there's no point in even saying Malchio if you're not going to blow shofar. Okay, says Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, I'm davening on my own. When I say Malchio, my servant will blow shofar for me. It seems like just the most logical thing ever. And Rava says back to him, nope, that's not what you're supposed to do. You only blow shofar interspersed with your musaf when you are davening with chaver ir, when you're davening with the community. And we have a breakdown similar. Tanya nami hachi, kshehu shom'an al hasider, ve'al shom'an al hasider ve'al seder brachot. So when you hear shofar, you should hear it both al hasider, meaning the tikiyot miyushav, that first set of shofar blasts. You should hear shofar like in the order of shofar, and al seder brachot. And you should also hear shofar interspersed with the brachot of the musaf. But b'med dvarim amurim, when are we talking about? What is this talking about? B'chaver ir, when you're davening with a community. Aval shelo b'chaver ir shom'an al hasider v'shelo al seder brachot. So when you're not with chaver ir, you hear them just in like the order of shofar blasts, those first 30 blasts of Tikiyot Mishav before we get to Masaf, and not Al Seder Brachot. So what is this Shelo Al Seder Brachot though? What is that Shelo? Does it mean you cannot hear that according to the Brachot, which would then absolutely provide support for Rava's position in the story above? Or does it mean you don't have to? What you have to do when you're davening alone is hear those blasts that are on the order of blasts required by the Talmud, and then you may hear them in addition, and then you cannot hear them in addition. So there's an ambiguity in the text here as to whether this fully provides support to Rava as stated above or not. Okay, so just like as the halacha shakes out, so almost everyone seems to fall in line behind Rava, which is actually which is actually kind of interesting. I'm just going to stop my share for a second, which is actually kind of interesting, particularly because you have that ambiguity in that supporting Baraita. And Rabba, but where it shakes out is that the Rambam says, we don't have a minhag like this. You actually have the Radvaz who says, it's up to you. Do you think you can keep your concentration well enough that if you're davening on your own and you're also blowing shofar or someone's blowing shofar for you, you won't get confused? So that's an important piece, but ultimately the Torah, Shulchan Aruch, and everyone who follows them says, no, during your silent Amidah, when you're davening alone, you cannot blow shofar. And that's really confusing given what we saw of Rabbi Akiva above. But I want to say that the answers about why, and we'll look at one provided by the Aruch HaShulchan in my last 1 minute, is that will help us shed some light maybe on why these women made such a big effort to show up to shul, and also hopefully help us, give us a little bit of a way to kind of forgive ourselves for our tefillah on our own being different and harder than it is when we show up to shul and we're in community. So let's just go back to this for 1 second. Okay, so here's the Aruch HaShulchan, and he says, okay, so he goes in line with the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch who say you cannot blow shofar when you're davening on your own, interspersed with your Amidah. What you do is just blow 30 blasts before, and that's it. And here's what he says about why. He says, the kivan shegazar Torah litkar shalosh pamim tkiya trua tkiya. So when do you 3 times you blow the order of tkiya trua tkiya. And the first one is BaSadeh Rishon Yikabu O Malchuto. So the first blast after Malchut, that's when we're receiving the yoke of God's kingship. Kemoshe Toki Mifnei HaMelech, in the same way that you blow before a king. And then in the second blast, that's Sheyaleh Zichroninu Lefanav Yitbarach. That's when the memory of us will go up before God. That's the shofar after Zichronot. And the third, and these keep like rising in intensity. So the first one kind of sets the stage. Who are we? Who is God? The second one is this prayer, like, please God, like, remember us, be in a relationship with us. And the third one is a recollection of that apex of that relationship, which is Matan Torah. And it's a prayer, and a prayer for us to return to that level of closeness. And so says the Aruch HaShulchan, so that's why we blow shofar according to myself. But that is only when you're davening with a community. You blow shofar interspersed with the brachot of Musaf only when you're davening with lots of people, because that's the only time when you can achieve that level of merit and that level of tefillah and that level of schus. But on your own, it's impossible. You just can't achieve it. And therefore, an individual does not blow shofar while he is saying the brachot of Musaf. And what I'm taking away from this, it might sound a little bit disheartening. It might sound like, oh, I can never achieve the level of tefillah on my own as I could in the community, and like my tefillah doesn't count as much and all that. And I want to say actually something a little bit different, which is that the structure of our tefillah when we daven alone is different, and it doesn't need to be an exact imitation of what it would be like in the community, because we have to own that our tefillah when we daven alone is just different, and we have to find a different kind of power in it. And if what we're searching for is the type of power that we experience with big crowds of people all together singing the tunes we've had every year, we're not going to find it. We're not going to find that on our own. We have to look for a different kind of power that comes from a tefillah that's structured differently, that looks differently, and that's just forgiving of us, that just says, yep, we're not going to achieve that in this way when we're davening on our own. There's a different type of zchut that we can achieve when we're davening individually, but it's achieved through a different kind of structure, and that's okay. And we are forgiving ourselves for our tefillah feeling different when we are davening alone this year. I have more to say on this, but I'm going to kick it over to Rabbanit Alissa.
And just as Rabbanit, thank you so much, Rabbanit Leah. That was beautiful. And just as Rabbanit Alissa is joining us to teach us about HaMelech BaSadeh, Davka this year. I also want to thank our co-sponsors, Tzuna and Jofa. Thank you so much for joining us. And over to you, Rabbanit Alissa.
Thank you so much, Rabba Sara and Rabbanit Leah. I made my title about HaMelech BaSadeh, that the king is in the field at this time of year, which we're going to look at a text in just a moment from where that comes from. But I think, Rabbanit Leah started off beautifully by explaining that part of her teaching is coming from the place of what she's been feeling this year, what she's been encountering, questions she's been receiving. And so too, what I'm going to share with you in the next 10 minutes is a reflection, I think, of a lot of the conversations that I've had with members of our community and beyond over the past many months. And I'm going to share my screen in just a moment to just show two quick texts. But I'm, of course, extremely grateful to be part of this group. And I also want you to know if thoughts or questions come up, feel free to reach out to me as well and continue the conversation, because 10 minutes is just a little taste. And part of what I'm going to be talking about is also connected to my Rosh Hashanah drasha for B'nai David in Los Angeles. And Rav Yosef and I both, our drasha are going out tomorrow. So it will have little pieces of this as well. What I've been feeling for the past many months is that we all are in this place, really in the battlefield. We're in this spiritual battlefield, very much like what Rabbanit Leah was describing, trying to figure out, how can we survive? How can we not just put one foot in front of the other, but also feel like we have meaning and purpose and that we're looking towards something. We feel there's a greater value to what it is that we're doing and that it's nourishing us. And I really feel like everyone I'm talking to is fighting for their connection to the people in their lives, their connection to their health, their connection to Hashem, and also very specifically to observance and feeling. Our community is meant to be shared in community. Our religion is so based in connecting to other people. And so over and over again, I've had discussions with people, whether it's about anxiety or depression or family dynamics. There's a real sense of like, we are fighting for our normal, we're fighting for our well-being, we're fighting for each other. And as we stand before God on Yom Hadin, God is also fighting for us, for us to be given life, and we are standing before God saying, don't let our accusers, don't let our sins, don't let our despair win and overcome us. And there's two texts that I want to share with you that, for me, I think the intersection of them brings this to life in an instructive way. So I'm just going to share my screen with you. Okay, so the first is from Likutei Moharan, which is Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. His teachings is codified by his student Rav Nassan, and this is a teaching he has on Elul. And both teachings actually pertain to Elul, and I think even though certainly right now we're in Elul, on Rosh Hashanah too, I think the energy and the intention is there as well. And so I think that they both frame for us this time in a very profound way. So Rabbi Nachman says, "Afilu imi pol chas v'shalom l'makom shi pol afilu b'sheol tachtiot, gam ken al yityaesh atzmo le'olam v'tamid yichapes v'vakesh et Hashem yitbarach." So even when a person struggles, even when a person falls, and this is in the context of his teaching about Ratzov Shov, which is the Hasidic idea of running to seek out God in our lives versus returning to God. And so he's speaking about Elul in relation to tshuva. So he says, even when a person is falling, is deeply struggling, even to the darkest pits of hell, also in that place, that person should not totally lose herself in despair and sadness, rather always be searching and seeking out for God. And do everything that we can to strengthen ourselves in that situation. Because even in the darkest pits of hell, God can be found there. And even in that place of true despair, that real dark battleground, we are able to cleave to God. It is possible, which is a remarkable idea, hearing it from Rabbi Nachman in particular, who understood depression in many levels. But also, I mean, I don't think we often think, well, in Sheol, that's where I'm going to find Hashem. And this, he quotes a verse that this is what it means. If I make my bed in Sheol, that's where I will find you still. And this is what he explains as Bechinat Shov, which is returning to God. And he says, the process of becoming people who do tshuva requires that we are doing ratzo v'shov, ratzo meaning like seeking and reaching out to God, and shov, returning to God, and doing this real sort of internal work. I think this image of finding God in the place that you would never expect to find God, of being willing to look for God in our darkest moments, is something that going back to what I said before, is something I'm seeing in our community members, seeing in myself, seeing in my family, that sometimes the way that we get through the darkness, or that we sit in it and survive, we find inspiration, is by doing what Rabbi Nachman's saying, which is like really working at finding it. And I think that's what Rabbanit Leah was saying as well, of sort of figuring out a way in the things we struggle with most to find meaning and connection. The other text I want to highlight is, and this is the concept of HaMelech BaSadeh from Alter Rebbe and his Tanya, this is specifically related to the time of Elul, but I think it can be applied also to when we stand before Hashem, whether in our homes or in our backyard minyanim, or whatever it is you're able to do before God. He says, so this is a parable of a king who, before he entered into his city, everyone in the city would come out and meet him face to face in the field. And so anyone who wanted to meet the king could do so, and the king received everyone who came to him with pleasantness. And for me, this image again goes back to what I mentioned of being in this spiritual battlefield, that Hashem is there as the king in the field, wanting to greet us, but also fighting for us and embracing us. And in that darkness, in that deep dark pit that Rabbi Nachman talks about as well. So we normally think of the sadeh, the field, as the king is out in the field, like the image of people in white dancing. But for me this year, I think there's also a spiritual battlefield element of God is with us outside in the field, in the spaces where maybe we're not used to praying, or we're not used to doing facilitating our connection to God. So part of what I wanted to leave us with is to think about what our individual battles are this year, and what our personal tools are in fighting those battles. What are our what's our sword and our shield? What's protecting us? What's keeping us safe and connected? What makes us feel that we have something to fight for, and that we can face the struggle with, and also to identify in that process the things that make us feel like God is by our sides in that field as well. One thing in particular I'll just leave us with is that there's one tool I think is unexpected, but especially if you think about Rabbi Nachman, makes a lot of sense, is having simcha as part of that darkness. That like actively creating joy in our lives right now is so important. And there's a quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs that the oldest form of cognitive therapy is humor. Humor is the first cousin to hope. And I think that anything we can do to just find those moments of joy. I know at B'nai David we have a WhatsApp group where people share, like an Elul, share the happy, share the moments of joy with each other, spread it, it's contagious. anything we can do to build that joy and that sword and shield that helps us fight to connect with God and stay connected to each other is incredibly nourishing and necessary. So my tefillah is that for all of us, we're each experiencing our own battle. Acknowledging that, appreciating that is really the first step to having hope and moving forward in it. And so being honest with ourselves about what our battle is part of the holy spiritual work we're doing right now. In addition, identifying the things that make us feel protected and that help us feel connected to Hashem are incredibly important and foster a sense of gratitude and inspiration. And so I hope that as we're davening at home or literally out in the field, Davka this year, many of us will be outdoors in different climates. In LA, we're dealing with air quality questions and a lot of other battles around that. But when we are out in the field, will we be willing to foster this kind of resilience and this kind of faith that Rabbi Nachman and the Alter Rebbe present for us? I pray that we all have a very meaningful, connecting Rosh Hashanah, and that we find that source of simcha, all the while acknowledging that our struggle is real and we are not alone in it. Shana Tova.
Thank you. Seeking moments of joy, finding God, all important things to add to the fanny pack I referenced in the beginning. And next I turn to Darshanit, Dr. Miram Udel, A Prayer Apart, Exempla from Yiddish Children's Literature. And we're so thrilled, Miram, about your new book, Honey on the Page, and can't wait to welcome you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rabba Sara. So it's actually a very good, natural, smooth segue from Rabbanit Alissa, because I want to talk about something that has brought me joy, and I also want to continue with that theme of HaMelech BaSadeh, of the king being in the field and what it means to encounter the king there. So the thing that has brought me the most joy over certainly the period of the pandemic, but even a while before that, was the arrival this past week of several copies of this book that I labored over for the past 7 years. Here it actually is in print. So it's a wonderful feeling. And when I was invited to contribute today with all of these other amazing speakers, I said, okay, but from now until Hanukkah, I'm only ever talking about Yiddish children's literature, and then I'll go back to kind of regularly scheduled Torah. So fortunately, it just so happens that I have stories in Honey on the Page pertaining to both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I want to just zoom out for a moment and say something more general, and then I want to zoom back into those stories. So Yiddish literature in general flourishes between the 1860s and 1939, and then there continues to be Yiddish literature after that, but that's the period, that's the great efflorescence. And for the most part, the classical writers of the Yiddish canon were really writing across a chasm. And that chasm, as they would have described it, was Frumkeit on one side, traditional piety, and Freiheit on the other. And it just so happens that the way that Yiddish literature developed historically was through a system of newspapers. It was cheaper to publish a newspaper than to publish a book. And as everyone knows, every good newspaper has a musaf. It has a supplemental section for each of the Jewish holidays. Not really for each of the Jewish holidays, that's not true. For Sukkot, Hanukkah, and Pesach. That was how it worked in Eastern Europe, that you had these big musafim for those holidays. And so we have a disproportionate number of holiday tales pertaining to those holidays. And most of them have the trappings of Frumkeit, but not necessarily any sort of engagement with the deeper themes of a given holiday. But when it comes to Yiddish children's literature, we have something different going on, because the authors are really trying to help children, even if they are going to be freie Kinder, children in a secular milieu, they're still trying to help those children engage substantively with the themes of a given holiday. So when I went back now through the lens of the pandemic and I took another look at the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur stories that I had included in my anthology, I realized that there's an extraordinary fit for this year, for what is hopefully our singular pandemic year of high holidays, because both of these stories end up discussing themes of individuals who need to, for different reasons, pray apart from and construct a spiritual experience apart from whatever a normal Jewish community would be or would look like. So first, I want to look at the story called A Village Saint by Sholem Ash. Sholem Ash is probably a somewhat familiar name if you have any familiarity with Yiddish culture. He was born in 1880, he died in 1957. I should say he was born, like, we think sometime around 1880, because we actually don't have a clear record of his birth. He grew up in a very large blended family. His parents wanted to make a rabbi out of him. It didn't really work out. He was a very prolific author, and he wrote a lot for adults, some more controversial Christological novels, most of his work much less controversial. And he wrote this beautiful volume of stories called Für Jugend, for youth. And a lot of these are holiday stories, and that includes A Village Saint. So A Village Saint, which I talked about a little bit pre-pandemic last year at the Sviva gathering, but I'm now seeing through new eyes, is about a boy named Yashek, which is not exactly a good Yiddish Hebraic name. It's a very Polish-sounding name, who is a rural Jew. He lives really outside of a shtetl in a dorf, in a little hamlet or village that is mostly Christian in the Polish countryside. And he has what we would now call learning differences. His parents take him to a tutor for his Judaic education, and he does not progress. In fact, on the eve of his bar mitzvah, he doesn't know how to daven. He certainly is not learning to learn any Torah, although that would have been typical of that time and place, that bar mitzvahs did not learn. But he has trouble even reciting the Shema. But he's a thinker, and he lies in the field, and he watches all of the animals, and he thinks about how these animals have their own connection to God, whether it's Snowy the sheep or the dog who barks. When the sheep baas and the dog barks, that's their tefillah. And for him, his tefillah, when he really thinks about God, he whistles. And it seems to him like everything that the tutor is trying to teach him and everything that his parents are trying to teach him is about a God who is living in some remote palace protected by Swiss guards. And the words El Melech Ne'eman and the Shema are like the password that you're supposed to say to get into the palace. But what if God isn't in the palace at all? What if God is actually out in the fields? And that's where it's possible to encounter God. So Yashek's bar mitzvah falls on Rosh Hashanah, and his parents get him a suit and a pair of shoes and his own sitter, and they take him into town. And it's kind of the disaster that you might imagine. I don't know if you've seen the Maccabees video where one of the Hanukkah one, where one of the Greeks comes into shul and he's holding the sitter upside down. Yashek is holding the sitter upside down. And the boys there and in shul are making fun of him, and his father is embarrassed, and his mother is watching from the balcony, sort of averting her gaze, not wanting to see it. And then finally at this climactic moment of the tefillah, Yashek is having all of these spiritual yearnings, and he lets loose with a whistle. And the whole shul breaks into bedlam. And they basically tackle him, they stop him, right? And then the tzaddik who's davening turns around, and he wants to know, who's the tzaddik, he asks about whoever it was, who's the tzaddik who broke through the veil to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with that whistle? And this is a Hasidic motif that we see in lots of authentic Hasidic storytelling, the idea of either a child or a less educated Jew who who whistles or who makes some other kind of inappropriate noise that is able to pierce the heavenly veil and get God's attention. And so what I want to really think about in this story today is that the way Sholem draws it, there is a real tension between HaMelech BaSadeh on the one hand, and the coronation theme, what I'm going to call El Melech Ne'eman, on the other. The idea that, God is in that palace and we access that palace through shul, and that's the right way to do things. But what if sometimes that's not an effective way to do things at all? Sometimes God really is in the field, and that's where we have to go in order to find God. I think I have 3 more minutes, so I'm going to quickly talk about this one other story by Tsuna Rabinovic. Tsuna Rabinovic was one of my great discoveries in putting together this book. She was born in 1895 in Russia. Very unusually, she had a Shana Aleph because she spent the year of 1913, 1914 in Eretz Yisrael, in what was then Palestine, before going back to Russia during World War I. And then her whole adult life, she was moving between New York and Israel. She finally makes Aliyah for good in 1961. She's published very widely in Latin America, and a lot of her work has been translated into Spanish and into Hebrew, but never before into English. So I feature her pretty prominently. And she has a story called Senor Ferrara's First Yom Kippur, and it's set in Trinidad, which is not where you find a lot of Yiddish stories set. And it is about a Jew visiting the community of Trinidad and being shown a certain set of rocky cliffs where the water down below the waves are just crashing and crashing. And he hears the story of Senor Ferrara, who discovers late in life, after a life as a devout Catholic, that he is actually descended from Sephardic Jews who were fleeing the Inquisition in the early 16th century. And he cannot be at peace with his Catholic identity. He starts frequenting the shul, he comes to Kol Nidre, he starts coming every Friday night, and at the end of his life, he's supposed to go be buried in the Catholic cemetery, and he decides that he cannot have his eternal rest apart from his people. So he mandates he actually be thrown into the ocean at that point. And his will is carried out because it's a matter of English colonial law. The last wills and testaments have to be respected exactly. And so the waves crashing next to that cliff are still fighting over the body of Senor Ferrara. And it says, gazing at them, I imagined how in the depths of the sea, the waves were still fighting over the Catholic who hadn't quite managed to die as a Jew. And so I think this story, read through the vantage point of this year, is posing the question. We think so much of the day of Yom Kippur is kind of shadowed and overhung with the threat of karet, right? We're thinking about karet, about failing to do this big mitzvah that could lead to some kind of spiritual excision. And I think this story kind of turns that on its head and makes us contemplate a situation where somebody has missed out on all of the ritual proprieties, yet forges this spiritual bond with Yiddishkeit, with Jewish community, Jewish practice, Jewish identity, even at the end of his days. So I hope that we carry the ideas of these stories, of these individuals who each for their own reason stood outside of the normal framework of communal prayer and still managed to find some kind of spiritual meaning in these holidays. Shana Tova.
Thank you, Darshanit, Miram, from isolation and Shofar to the Sadeh, to the castle, to finding your unique voice within community. It's now my pleasure to turn to Rabba Shani Gross, who will lead us in the final component of our Power Hour Torah called the Court of Compassion. Rabba Shani is the Director of North American Programming, Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies. Thanks, Shani.
Thank you, Rabba Sara. Hi, everybody. When Jen asked me to teach, she said I had 10 minutes. And I said, I don't think I need more than 5. And so we'll see who is right when we get started. So the beginning of chapter 3 of the Talmud of Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Tractate Rosh Hashanah, begins with a question of who can serve as a witness, and more specifically, can a judge also serve as a witness? And like any good Jewish question, the answer is yes and no. When can't a judge serve as a witness? In the case of a capital crime. If a judge witnesses a capital crime, they cannot serve as both witness and judge. Why not? Because as the Gemara tells us, "Techaziyuhu diktil nafsha," if a judge sees a person, sees the defendant having killed another person, lo matzu chazule schuta. The judge will not be able to find any merit to exonerate this person, this individual. Now, on the one hand, this makes a lot of sense. Seems like a good idea, because there's no way for this defendant to have a fair trial if the judge has seen him commit the actual crime. There's no way he's going to be exonerated. And maybe we might even say even more that this is a good idea because who knows what this judge saw? Maybe he saw one piece of what happened, and he won't be able to be objective. On the other hand, if all that matters at the end of the day in our court system is justice, if we're trying to pursue justice, and zooming out into the specifics, if we have somebody who's seen this defendant kill someone else, who cares about the particulars? Who cares if he was a witness and also a judge? We should only care about justice being served. And I think this line, lo matzu chazile schuta, they won't be able to find with him any schut, any merit, suggests that perhaps our court system is not actually just about justice being served, but actually about finding schut in every single person, even in this worst case scenario, finding some merit in this defendant, some merit in this person to free him, to exonerate him. In which case, our court system as a whole is not just about finding justice, but also about mercy and compassion. And we're now about to enter this time of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the Yomim Noraim, the Yom Din, these days of judgment and awe. And I think we can all agree that this has been obviously a very, very hard year. And while we're standing in shul, or more likely standing at home in our sort of personal prayer space, and we're beating our chests and going over all the ways we could have been better, I think it's important to also remember that we all have schutz, we all have merit. We all need to look at ourselves with compassion for what has been a really, really hard time and continues to be a hard time. And I wish that just as we are compassionate and try to be compassionate for others, we are compassionate for ourselves, and God willing, as God will be with all of us in the coming days. So thank you. 5 minutes. There we go. Shana Tova.
Impressive, Rabba Shani. Very impressive. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. This is our Power Hour of Torah, which will be a holiday series over the course of the year. So stay tuned, because we will be back with you for Hanukkah with another stellar group of scholars. We have a few things that we just wanted to make sure that everybody's aware of before the high holidays. So hopefully you've seen in our emails and our social media that Maharat, Yeshivat Chovavei Torah, and the IRF partnered to develop a high holiday companion, which I am going to put a link to in the chat now. You can either download it and have it digitally, or if you'd prefer, you can even order a copy from Amazon. So the link is there in the chat. And also save the date, because if you enjoyed today learning with Darshanit, Dr. Miram Udel, we'll be coming together again with Jofa and Sviva on October 27th, when she'll be in conversation with Dr. Laura Shaw-Frank about the book Honey on the Page, and how children's literature and the feminist underpinnings of children's literature. She's showing you pictures now. So stay tuned for more information. That is already up on our websites, and you'll be hearing more from us very soon about that. And Rabbanit Alissa is already ordering the book, and I know many of us have our shipments on the way. So this is a very exciting time in the year, albeit complicated with world events. But in terms of the Torah that's to be shared and to be learned, there's a lot of amazing things happening. So thank you all for being here. If you missed any part of today's webinar, it is already up on the Maharat Facebook page, and we'll circulate a recording of the full webinar later on in the day. And if you have any questions or ideas or things you'd really like to learn about, please feel free to reach out. And with that, we wish you all a Shana Tova.
Thank you. Shana Tova to you as well.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Thank you.